Elaine O Hara was born on the 17th of March 1976 in Killiney, Dublin. She was one of 4 children to Frank and Eileen O'Hara. Growing up, Elaine had a difficult time. She suffered severe bullying and self-harmed. From her teenage years, she was treated and hospitalised for depression and borderline personality disorder. Unfortunately, she also had asthma, diabetes, and she was also dyslexic. In 2002, her mother died, and this would have a terrible effect on Elaine. She did try and take her life at least 3 times over the years. Elaine had many challenges in her life, but when she felt balanced within herself, she wanted to do so much. She loved children and was even training to be a Montessori teacher. She worked as a childcare assistant and worked part-time in her local shop. In 2005, she moved out of her family home and would get an apartment in Blackrock, which is an upscale part of Dublin. Eventually in 2008, she would move to Stepaside, South Dublin, a small village near the Dublin Mountains. All Elaine ever wanted was to be loved. She was extremely lonely. Because of her mental state and low self-esteem, she would enter into a relationship with a married man. He would treat her badly over a period of years and eventually take her life. Graeme Dwyer was born on September 13, 1972 in Bandon, County Cork. He is one of 4 children to Sean and Susan Dwyer. He had a modest background but loved the finer things in life. He attended the Dublin Institute of Technology to study architecture. Previous to attending university, he had a relationship with a woman, Emer McShay, and they had a son together in October 1992. But this relationship broke down and she took their son back to her home in Donegal. Emer would state later in the trial that the relationship broke down due to Graham's short temper and abnormal behaviour. In 1997, Dwyer was in his final year of university and he met his future wife, Gemma Healy, who was also studying architecture. She was from a wealthy background, beautiful and clever. 3 years later, they would buy their first home together. By the time Graham was 35, he was well established, married with 2 more children, partner in his firm and living in Foxrock, Dublin. He was all about money and status and what he liked to do. His hobbies were flying model aircraft and racing around the track in his 911 Porsche. He didn't like people to have more than he did. Stories would be told in court of his work life at the start of his career and his temper. On one occasion, he broke into the firm's computer system to see what people were earning, and when he discovered they were earning more than him, he went absolutely spare. He once had a disagreement with a colleague at a social event, and the following Monday, when they all arrived into work, this man's workstation was trashed and computer destroyed. Dwyer's tenure with the firm was brought to a close, and the management were so concerned by his swings in his mental state that they changed the locks when he left. It's uncertain when Dwyer's double life began. He was known as clever and charming. When he drank, he was a bit of a womanizer in the early days. He would target women that were overweight and women that seemed insecure, and Dwyer would describe them as easy prey. In 2008, the economy crash would happen. Dwyer's income would be cut by 50%. His wife would be made redundant, but she managed to get another job. In court, it would be shown that they were in dire straits financially, Dwyer even having his friends chip in for dinner for his 40th birthday. On the 22nd of August 2012, Elaine was released from hospital and she rang a friend that she worked with and told her she was feeling great and that she had volunteered to work at the Tall Ships Festival the next day. On that morning, Elaine met her father at Shangana Cemetery to visit her mother's grave, went home and waited for a message from Dwyer. Dwyer and Elaine communicated with unlisted phones. There was one number in each under the names Master and Slave. Dwyer told Elaine to meet him that day and to only bring her slave phone and her keys. She was to meet him at the shoreline of Shangana Park. Elaine drove out to the park and left her car. She entered the park and began her walk to the shore, all the while in communication with Dwyer. On her walk to the meeting point, Elaine got lost and couldn't find the bridge to cross over, to get to the other side of the park and to the shore. She stopped a jogger looking for the way and he pointed her in the right direction. This man would be the last person to see her alive. Elaine was walking to her death, and Dwyer was the only one that knew this. 2 days later, and Elaine's family are getting worried. She hasn't been to work and no one has seen her. Her father reported her missing and a search was launched and missing posters were put up all around the area. A week later, the search was called off and posters were taken down. Her car was found in Shangana car park and it was concluded that Elaine had taken her own life by drowning. It's the 13th of September 2013 and it's nearly 13 months since Elaine went missing. Dwyer is having dinner with his wife, celebrating their joint birthdays and carrying on with life. On this day, Elaine's body would be found. On the 11th of September 2013, a few days before Elaine's body was found, 3 childhood friends pulled up to Barrowtree Reservoir for a chat. It was a very hot summer, which is rare in Ireland, and the level of water was only about a foot. They noticed a yellow rope with something shiny attached to it. They decided to try and fish it out. What they pulled out was to be a woman's white vest and a blue hoodie. They tried again and they retrieved some adult items. They stopped after that as they were afraid of what else they'd pull up. They left everything on the wall and went about their business. One of the men had an uneasy feeling about what they had found, and so the next day he went back and all the stuff was still there. He gathered it up and brought it to the Gardaí. The guard that was on duty bagged everything and put it into evidence. The next day the guard went down to the reservoir himself to see if he could find anything else, but the water was too dark and murky. At the same time, Elaine's body would be discovered by a dog walker 25 kilometres away at Killikee Mountain in a wooded area. On the 14th of September, the guard went down to the reservoir again, this time going into the water and doing a fingertip search. He found a set of keys, adult items, an inhaler, a partial phone and a knife. The keys piqued his interest as it had a supermarket loyalty tag attached, and so he rang the supermarket and the next day it came back to Elaine O Hara as the owner. The guard then entered the name into the central database. Elaine's name was there as a missing person from a year before, and he also found out on that day that the body in the mountains had just been identified as Elaine O Hara. Only 2/3 of Elaine's body was recovered. Animals unfortunately had got at her body. Over the coming days, the Garda Sub-Aqua team would find more things. 2 more mobile phones, 2 SIM cards, more adult items, Elaine's glasses and a backpack. This was now a fast-paced investigation. CCTV of Elaine's apartment block was examined and they had footage of a man coming and going in the weeks before Elaine's disappearance, carrying a similar backpack to the one they found. Text messages were recovered from the phones and semen samples were taken from the mattress, which would later be matched to Dwyer, in which Gardaí would recover his DNA from his bins on the path outside his house. Dwyer would have been aware of Elaine's body and items being found, but he kept his cool. Gardaí were closing in on him and the information they recovered from the phones and CCTV brought the Gardaí to Graeme Dwyer's home 6 weeks after Elaine's body was recovered, and he was arrested on suspicion of murder. He refused at first to admit he was the owner of the phone, but eventually he did, and he admitted also that he was in an intimate relationship with Elaine. On the 18th of October 2013, he was charged with the murder of Elaine. He applied to the High Court for bail, and on the recommendation of the Gardaí, he was refused. He appealed this decision, but it was denied. Over the next 18 months, he would sit in Cloverhill prison. His wife and family would never visit him, and they returned home to Sligo, never to return. They also changed their name back to his wife's maiden name, and never set foot in the house again. Looking further into Dwyer's laptop, there were stories of travelling to Newcastle, assaulting and stabbing a woman. Another story called Killing Darcy turned out to be true. Darcy was a girl from Maine, Massachusetts in the USA, and they had met on a website. She was in a bad place in her life and wanted to die. Graeme had offered to kill her. Darcy would become a key witness in this trial. The trial took place in the Central Criminal Court in front of a jury of 7 men and 5 women over 43 days in a span of 10 weeks, and 197 witnesses were called. Dwyer pleaded not guilty. The defence said there was no evidence of stab marks from a knife on the bones, and that it was possible that Elaine did take her own life, and it was all circumstantial evidence. The prosecution said that the series of texts stating about stabbing and killing turned fantasy into reality. Frank O'Hara, his partner Sheila and family displayed nothing but dignity during the trial. They had to sit through the most vile evidence and listen to how their beloved Elaine suffered so much at the hands of Dwyer. On the 27th of March 2015, Dwyer was found guilty of the murder of Elaine and sentenced to life in prison. The jury were offered counselling after the verdict as the evidence was so harrowing. It's 2022 and Dwyer has entered an appeal to have his conviction overturned, and it could be heard as early as the autumn of this year. He also applied to the EU justice system, stating that the use of metadata from his mobile phone, which helped convict him, violated his human rights and his rights to privacy. He won this case, and it could be a major factor in overturning his case. I guess we'll just have to wait and see.